Hello and welcome to episode number 329. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Thank you so much for stopping by. When we talk about change management in project management, then the words resistance and tension, they often spring to mind. Consider the resistance to change management, for instance, when two organizations merge, or the fear that employees will fear when a part of their job is automated and some of their skills become redundant. But the problem isn't really the change itself, in spite of the difficulties that it may bring. Are you a PMP certified and want to earn 37 PDUs quickly and for less than $5 per PDU? That's no problem with the Agile Prepcast. It not only prepares you for your PMI ACP exam, but also qualifies for a lot of PMP PDUs. Visit agileprepcast.com/PDU for the details. To discuss the project change management process with us today, I'm very pleased to welcome back one of our favorite interview guests, Suzanne Madsen. Her book, The Power of Project Leadership, contains a large section on change management. She says, organizational change is vital for any business that wants to survive and thrive in our increasingly competitive and fast-paced world. The problem is that many project leaders struggle to fully motivate and engage their teams in their process. They often move too fast, are too outcome-driven, and not sufficiently consultative in their approach. So let's change that. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with Suzanne Madsen, project leadership coach, author, and speaker.
Hello, Suzanne. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is like what, your 200th interview here on the program?
I don't know, but time just passes so quickly.
Yes. So we want to talk about change. Let's start very basic here. Why is organizational change hard?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for it. Basically, number one, we are not trained in it. And why are we not trained? Because it's got to do with people. And a lot of project managers are not very well trained and versed when it comes to interfacing with people. So I think if we consider that we have some technical project managers out there who are very good at being rational and logical and designing a new system or a new device, it's a completely different skill set that we need when we're talking about organizational change. And also I think that a lot of projects actually have that change element to them to some extent. And where there is a large change element, we can really struggle because it's about human behavior. And I think that's fundamentally why it's difficult.
And what exactly do we mean by resistance to change?
Well, that's interesting because resistance to change has become this label that we apply to people who seem unwilling to accept a change. But when we look a little bit deeper, well, what is it that they're resisting? They're actually not resisting the change. They're resisting what the change represents to them. So oftentimes this so-called resistance will kick in because we believe that we will lose something. So it could be status or power or comfort that we have. And because of the change, we feel uncertain now. How will that affect us? So that's actually really what we are resisting too. It's almost like self-protection.
Right, and you've already alluded to this a little bit, but what happens if we as project managers are bad at managing this change and this resistance to change?
Yeah, so what happens is that the whole project is not going to be as successful because people are going to resist. And that happens because as we said before, we treat it as a mechanical, as a logical process where we don't go in and engage with people. So when change is badly managed, it's because we don't go in and connect with what is really going on below the bonnet here. Why why are people feeling fearful? So it's actually that emotional aspect where when we don't manage change well, fear and uncertainty is allowed to propel out of proportion. And that will hinder people, that will hold people back.
How does a good story help us overcome this?
Yeah, so imagine that you have an organizational change. So we can talk about some examples. One example may be that we have two offices merging. That's a big organizational change. Or maybe we can look at a smaller one where we are talking about an office move. So you might think, well, an office move, that's really all about just moving people from A to B, isn't it? Well,
yeah, no, because I don't really want to sit next to Joe in the new place.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm way too far from the restroom, and I no longer have a window seat.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
It's open plan. You used to have an office.
Yeah.
But what's worse, it's longer from your home. You have to commute further. So there's all this stuff going on, right? So the change story is really, how as a manager am I going to tell that story to my employees? Am I going to say, yep, that's it, suck it, and see? And so what are you complaining about? It'll be a new building. Or am I really going in and telling a story which tells people, why are we doing this? And how will it affect you? That's really what a good story is so important, because people feel that through a good story, people can feel that they're part of it. They can feel that their fears and concerns are being met and that they are being listened to, really. And that's hugely important.
You mentioned being part of the story. How can I encourage my team and those affected by the change to be part of this story?
Yeah, there are a number of ways we can do that. And that's important because people feel more engaged. And if someone comes to you, Cornelius, and says, I want you to do this. I want, you have to change the fence to the right of your house. Why do I have to do that? Why are you deciding that I'm having to change my fence? But if you are being part of that story, if you work for the local community or whatever, and you've all decided this is what we're doing or whatever it is, if you are part of it, you will feel responsible, you will feel engaged. And that is really why we need to draw people in. We want to avoid just telling people what is happening. We can do that in a number of ways. We can do staff surveys where we elicit their opinions. We can have discussion forums, either online or more through face-to-face workshops. Or we can, I think even better, we can give people a role to play. So let's imagine we have this office move. And there are lots of employees who feel a little bit fearful. They all want that window seat, as you're saying. Well, we can engage them, make them part of the story by giving them a role to play on that project team. So they are part of helping to understand who sits where, the seating plan, for instance. So that there are very specific ways in which we can draw people in, ask, listen, because it must not just be pro forma. It must be real. We must really take the employees' thoughts and opinions and views on board in order to make them part of the story.
Mm. It's funny you mentioned the fence, because that actually happened to me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you didn't know this, but yeah, I used to have a wooden fence here. We live in a high fire area, and the insurance company one day came and said, you have to replace the fence, so we're not insuring you anymore. That cost me about $15,000. Anyway,
and were you resistant?
Yeah. What I didn't understand was, okay, you're making me move the fence, or replace the fence, but the wooden deck, the deck that actually is fully there, that's flat, huge deck made out of wood, burns, that touches the house. I don't have to replace that, just the fence?
Yeah, that's
okay. That I didn't understand. Anyway, let's move on here. In one of your articles, you talk about the need of telling this story in such a way that it touches people's human needs. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, this really goes back to what we said early on, that change is all about people and it's all about understanding human behavior. Because I can tell a good change story about why we're moving from building A to building B. But if I really want to help people overcome that resistance to change and make them more pro the change, I have to touch those underlying needs so that they are no longer fearful. that's a really big shift. It is not just talking at a logical level, but it's talking to people about what's in it for them. Because what's in it for me, that's all about my needs. Most of us, we only really care about ourselves, to be honest.
All right. There are 6 needs that you talk about in that article, and let's review those 6 needs briefly and see how they relate to organizational change. So let me just give you the first one here. The first need you talk about is certainty. How does that relate to organizational change?
Well, certainty is probably the biggest one of all 6, because we all have a need for being safe, secure, certain, for understanding that we have a job, that we're being paid, how long our projects go on for, etc., etc., etc. When something changes, it fundamentally shakes that, because change is uncertain. So this is the biggest blocker in change. So if we want to help people overcome the resistance to change and the fear, we have to provide clarity, because clarity makes us feel more certain. So that means, well, what do we mean by this change, this office move? What does it mean? Where are we moving to? When is it going to happen? How does it affect you? That's really how we can address certainty, giving people clarity. The next one is variety, and that's actually opposite. And I think variety is the only human need that works with us in organizational change, because we all have an inherent need for stimuli, for something new, for change and variety. And when we're telling the story, that change story, we need to appeal to people's need for excitement, actually, because we all have that need. And we need to make people feel that actually they're gaining something. This is exciting, it's new. The third human need is significance. What this means is that we all have a need to feel important and special, and we want to stand out. In a change context, we can appeal to people's needs here by helping them understand how the change can make them more significant. So I often think of this as a bit of an ego driver. So for instance, if 2 companies are merging, that's a big change. Well, how can your power be improved through this? How can you gain more responsibility through this? And that's really, again, a way we can appeal to people for this particular need significance. The fourth human need is connection. This is opposite to the ego driving need, actually. This is all about us wanting to belong, our need to belong to a community or a team. Now, again, when organizational change happens, some of these teams can be unrooted. People can feel uncomfortable because they're not really sure where they belong anymore. Again, by telling the change story, we have to make sure that we make people feel that they're part of the community by drawing them in, and maybe also giving them reassurances that their team will stay intact, etc. The fifth human need is growth. So basically, we all have a need to develop, to grow, to get better at things. And in change, this is an obvious need to actually talk about, because when we change, there is often an opportunity to do something new, to grow and to learn. You're merging with a new company. Well, there are new areas of responsibility. You may need to grow your skills, and that will help you build your CV, etc. So that is a specific need, again, that we can use. And lastly, contribution. All have a need to contribute to something bigger than ourselves, to a worthy cause. This is actually a really tough one, but sometimes when organizational change happens, it's for a greater good. And it's that greater good that we need to communicate to people. We need to communicate there is a bigger purpose and that people are part of something bigger. It could be that they are really helping to impact the community or the organization in a bigger way. So I hope that, I know this was a lot to take in probably, but I hope that I just gave an overview of those six needs and how they affect change.
Yeah. So we have certainty, variety, significance, connection, growth, and contribution. I assume not everyone will value these in the same way, right?
Yeah, right. So we're all different. The 6 human needs are the same for all of us, but the extent to which we are steered by them very much differs. Yeah.
All right. And how can we know which of these are more important to which members of our team? or stakeholders that are impacted by the change?
Yeah, that really comes down to conversation, spending time with people, which is what's sometimes so hard for very technically minded project managers. Also because we're strapped for time. So we may not have that time, but it is really about observing people. What do people like? What do they don't like? And you can also ask your employees, what would you like more of in your job? What would you like less of? And you can also ask them what hopes they're having for the new change. So what opportunities do you feel what are you hoping that it will bring you? That's going to give you an insight into what people actually value. So so I think it's through observation and questioning.
And what kind of a change should we see in the overall performance in our teams with our stakeholders when we follow this kind of approach, trying to tell the story, bringing them in, answering the human needs?
Yeah, so let's start with, so what happens if we don't do it? If we don't do it, people resist, they're not moving with you, they're moving against you. It's hard, your change initiative may fail, or it may take longer, or it may cost more. So the opposite of that is that you will get more engagement. Your team will understand why we're doing this. They will see the opportunities. They will understand exactly how it is going to help them get their needs fulfilled. And that means that they want to participate. They may even want to get directly involved, take ownership, take on some tasks. They may want to be part of the team. They may want to volunteer their time to actually do this office move. So it's a completely different setup where people will be pro instead of con. So it's just a complete reversal. People will not be resistant. They will welcome the change. And that will be smoother for everybody.
Before I get to my final question for you, let me throw this in here. You are both a project management trainer and also a consultant with a strong focus on leadership. And you have many customers whom you help to start new projects and work on their projects. So how do you and your business help your customers overcoming change on their projects? What's your approach?
Well, actually, I would say it's all about listening to people and not making assumptions. Because when people start out a project, they do something new, it can be so tempting to assume we know what we want. We assume we know what the users want, and we want it done yesterday. And that approach is very task-oriented. So it's all about questioning people and saying, are we sure that we know what the users want? Are we sure we know how it affects people? And having that consultative approach, that really helps. I also think I do a lot of collaborative planning with teams. When you collaborate, it is a completely different process than the project manager or the sponsor dictating what's going to happen on this project. So collaboration, listening, spending more time with people one-on-one, taking an interest in other people and beginning to understand why do people do what they do? Why did they say what they say? That's really what it boils down to. And that's what I try to encourage people to do.
All right. You are, of course, a master at all of this, but we are not. So therefore, finally, my last question for you. How do we start? What are the first few steps that you recommend to our listeners that they take in order to apply all the ideas that they've heard about right now in order to overcome resistance to change before it actually becomes a problem?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for your compliment. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I'll take it on. So how can people implement this, right? What can they do? Well, I think first of all, ask themselves, is there a change element to my project? On most projects, there will be a change element, which is more human-led. If you are working on a technology system and you never see the end users, maybe there is a very little component. But that's the first step, really. Recognize that there is a change element where you need a slightly different approach. And then look at the impact, number two, the second step, I would say. Look at the impact that the change is having on the people. Are we talking about end users? Are we talking about employees? Are we talking about team members? What's the impact on people from this change initiative? And following on from that, how can I communicate, first of all, how can I communicate that impact clearly? Because that will address the biggest human need that is often a problem here, which is certainty. So I really encourage the listeners to consider, how can I give people more certainty, meaning clarity? Closed doors will make people feel more fearful because they're not being included. You want to have an open door approach, an inclusive approach, where you tell people whatever you know, how will this affect you? And you take a consultative approach. Ask people, how does this work for you? When I say we're going to do this and this is going to change, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? So really asking open questions to understand, how are people reacting? What is the impact here? That would be my recommendation. And I think that they're big steps, actually.
Excellent. Suzanne, thank you very much for all these great tips and for being once again a guest on the program.
It's a pleasure, as always.
And that was our interview with Suzanne Mattsson on how to overcome resistance to project change management. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, and because we are talking about change, I can only repeat this one here. Change is inevitable, except from vending machines. Until next time.